Good morning. I'm telling you, you guys are in the right session. I hit the pinnacle of my career this morning. When I went into LinkedIn, and I found out that my mother had actually attested to one of my skills in virtualization. So I am now at the peak of my career. My mom knows that I'm great at that. I'm Noah Wasmer. I've been in this space actually almost my entire career. If those of you that don't know me, I've known Brian for probably over a decade. I've known Jack more recently. I was at VMware. I was one of the early people inside of the VDI team running product management for VMware View back when it was acquired as Propero. And then I recently, about a year and a half ago, joined Mobile Iron as their VP of product. And today, I want to give you, as the brief description says, just kind of a view into why I believe this is the next decade of computing. This is in no means a Mobile Iron pitch. In fact, I have a huge amount of respect for Citrix, for VMware, for AirWatch, and I think they all do some incredible things. But I want to talk about why this industry is shifting over the next 10 years. So let's go ahead and get started. And one of the most interesting things is that if we take a step back to just simply 5 years ago, I don't know if everybody even can remember 5 years ago that iPhone 2.0, the 3G model, was first released. Just 5 years ago. And in fact, that when Windows Mobile 6.0 was 30% of the market share. It's hard to believe. I mean, how many Windows Mobile devices do I have in the room? Do I have any? Anybody? Okay, couple. Android, there was not a single Android device in the market. It was an open handset alliance. There's no devices. And in fact, not a single tablet had shipped. Right? There were some ideas of what an iPad was, but not a single one in market. And today, when we look at it, over 600 million iPhones sold, 40 million Galaxy S3s alone, 50 billion apps from the App Store, and we see that PC shipments are down 14%. In fact, they're actually updated that they're down 20%. And I'm sure you're experiencing this inside of your enterprises, that there's a transition happening. And right now, I believe that a lot of people believe this shift is, hey, we've got to go support a phone, or maybe a tablet is a tertiary device, not a primary device. But I can speak firsthand that this is not a fad, and that in fact, I do believe that the transition we're seeing is one that we'll see for the next decade. And if you look at some data from Mary Meeker, this is where I've spent my entire career. And I know things like Flex Profile Kit, and I know things like Win32k.sys can blue screen a Citrix box. I've lived that life, right? I know the Active Directory join System Center model, as well as a lot of you. But this transition is happening, and in fact, when we look at this, we don't really consider it a post-PC era. What we call it is really a mobile-first era. And this is something that is an industry term where we're talking about people in groups of defined users starting to say that they use a mobile device as their primary device. And we're seeing this, this is an incredibly common phenomenon. Speaking just on behalf of some of our customers, we have customers that are deploying over 500,000 mobile devices. Customers deploying 500,000 devices. It sounds this large, right? If you think about some of the major shoe manufacturers up in Portland, Oregon, they help to deliver most of their services through mobile devices. Some of the most major retailers, if you look at them, are now doing point of sale on mobile devices. Right? You go into one of the actually Chicago-based retailers, and today if you go in and want to cash out, you'll notice that the cash register stable has become clear, and now they have a mobile platform instead. There's a company that speaks on the record for us, Cargill. How many people have heard of Cargill? Pretty common, big known company. They used to every morning print out sheets of how much crops were worth, put them into binders, stick them into the trunk of their car, and drive out to the farms, right? And they would say, go to the farmer and say, hey, here's how much your crop is worth. That has now transitioned to a single application, right? That they can look up in real time, do the trade live with the farmer. The farmers absolutely love it, right? It's transitioned their work process. We see this time and time again that this is about how do we help the business be more agile. In fact, one of our customers, anybody heard of Lidl? How about Trader Joe's? Trader Joe's is owned by Lidl. They have 7,000 stores worldwide. Instead, they used to fax out every day. You know how shelf space matters inside of big big grocery stores that you pay more for whatever shelf space you're on, they now have an iPad app that when they hold it up to the location, it will show them what that shelf space is supposed to look like, and that is an app that is fed from corporate every morning. And so this is becoming a mainstream function. It is not a tertiary device. It is their primary device for doing their work. In fact, we hear a lot of companies today saying sales teams will only be given an iPad, right? That should make sense, right? They are consumption-oriented. They get new current information, new brochures, and an iPad is the better display. How many people have heard of a company called Mars Candy, right? Again, hundreds of thousands of employees worldwide that they are all given a phone, and when they go into a store, they say how many candy bars are left on the shelf, right? It's a much better, much cheaper device than a full PC. So what is this change about? And first and foremost, I think I want to give a lot of credit to, Jack does a phenomenal job in his book, by the way, which I will probably say 50 times in this session. You need to go buy that book. It's a great book if you haven't already read it. But the primary notion is that there's a term called MDM. And I know some people like to say, oh, MDM is dead and is going away, right? Has anybody heard that notion? It's kind of like saying Active Directory is going away, right? I will say, how many people are up to date with what iOS 7 is delivering? Pretty much, anybody? There are 60 major new enterprise features inside of that product. 60 major, and these are not button clicks, hey, turn off this function. There are services like Volume Purchase Program for applications. There are things like Per App VPN, Enterprise Single Sign-On. Every single one of those features, 30 are on device, 30 are on applications. Every single one requires what Apple calls an MDM profile. You cannot have any one of those features without putting that component down onto the device. How many people saw today's VentureBeat article that talked about Windows 8.1? Right? I know there's some debate. Do you really need MDM for Windows? Well, in fact, Microsoft has incorporated OpenMDM into their Windows 8.1 product. Right? What are they saying? They're saying that this transition is about a new way of doing attestation for the user, getting users the apps, the services, and the content that they want on those different devices. So again, as somebody that loves the idea of how do we get the right tools and services to users, this is what is becoming a primary platform for how we deliver those key efforts. So first and foremost, there's a lot of conversation about BYOD, right? Bring your own device. And I will tell you that in our recent customer session, where we had 300 of the largest companies in the world come together, almost 100% of them had a BYO program. Almost 100%. Very few that don't are usually in either government, DoD, or they're in incredibly highly regulated environments where they're corporate issued. But it's not just about bring your own device. It's about also bring your application, because end users want to use the apps that they want. How many people use Evernote here or something like that? Could you imagine going to a company and them saying, you can't use that? Sorry, Scott, no more Evernote, right? Like we don't allow that here. That is something that we think will change. So this fundamentally at its core, this transition has to be about enabling end users to get the applications and services that they need to get their job done. This thing's vibrating like crazy. It's kind of fun. Like my hand's shaking. Second is that we recently had one of our large financial services COO, the true COO of that business come in, and he said that before mobility, every single one of their devices was tethered with Cat5, right? And that they would give all their services in a command and control model, right? In the model of, hey, here's a service coming down from System Center, and if they checked the device and there was an app on there, it would go through some scripts to uninstall that application. We have to prepare ourselves for the notion of real-time application desire, that they get it, they get fulfilled with that application, and that we can remove it in what I call a real-time posture engine. We'll talk about what that is. And it also is always driven by this need to reduce costs and increase efficiencies. And I'll talk a little bit about how I believe fundamentally this architecture itself supports a radically lower cost equation, and why even across Windows, across iOS, across Android, this will be a way that you can save the business new money. So let's dive into it. I do believe that we are at the very beginnings of this transition. And no offense to Microsoft, I have a lot of love for them, but I do believe the Surface is that monkey, right? It is that first beginning stepping stone down this path, right? It's a thick device with 3 hours, a lot of heat coming off of it, right? And it kind of has this in-between state of a desktop and this modern state. We are going to evolve. It is not hard to envision some place out there where you can seamlessly go between screens. And so I want to paint a picture of what an end state looks like. And I don't want to talk about some big flying car. That's not what I want to. I want to talk about what is actually out there and stated as a direction. And so I'm going to use Microsoft's vision themselves, Microsoft Vision 2019. How many people have watched this? Great, great. This is something that they put out 5 years ago. And if you remember, 5 years ago, it was a Windows Mobile, no tablet, right? This was a much different state than where we were. I'd welcome you to watch it. It's really, really compelling. The first thing they show is a student, I think her name is Ayla, and she's presenting on a telepresence screen, and the other side is India, right? And she's presenting and drawing on the board, and they're seeing it in real time across the screen. But this really cool thing is this woman is on an airplane, and she's watching the presentation in real time of what her daughter's presenting, right? I mean, so this is, again, this blurring of corporate and personal. You see on the side, it's really hard to see, but you see Shannon's stuff, Isla's workspace, and then her classroom. So she's blending all of her corporate and personal data into a single experience that is showing up on a different screen. And it goes a little forward to show this guy working on, he has 3 panels, and he has this really cool little device here, almost looks like a tablet, a glass screen, and he swipes information from one of his desktop screens onto the tablet, and you can see he also can project across any wall in the room, right? So he's got all kinds of visualization of information. And he takes his little white brick and he carries it into another meeting room, and he swipes it on the wall, and he's sharing it with his colleagues, right? He's going, hey, this is really, really good information and really, really cool. We should all collaborate. And in fact, he pulls people together, and you see that they've now got some kind of telepresence going on in the background, but they're all working and collaborating in real time on this content. Seems pretty future-y. You know, there's one product that I think will make a ton of money just looking at this view, and that really is Windex. It is going, because there's so much glass, I'm telling you, people are going to be cleaning like crazy. So that's the first product. If you want to make a stock tip, go invest in, I think this is Clorox. But in reality, what's funny about this is when you think about it, actually you could deliver this today. If I, for example, have my business say, I'm going to use only iOS. I'm going to use iPhone, iPad, Apple TVs in every room, right? And I'm going to use iCloud. I'm going to start to seamlessly synchronize content between devices. I can walk into a room and it can project, right? I can potentially do something like FaceTime or some of Cisco's new web presence on side of that device. The technologies are not that hard to see this vision coming to reality. And if I were to choose Windows with Surface and SkyDrive and Windows Pro, I could probably achieve some of those same goals as well along the Android platform, right? I could choose this homogeneous solution across all my devices, and I get something near this, and the screens will get thinner, and they'll get clearer, and they'll get cooler, right? And I'll be able to project this data. Problem is how do we really stitch this all together into what I call a fabric, a security fabric of policies and configuration and information that allows me to seamlessly transition between all of these different platforms? How does my identity flow through these different services? How do my files? How do my applications? How does it know how to change my state? And what I'll tell you is first and foremost, the most powerful thing is what I call a posture engine. Right? How do I know that if an end user transitions to a different location or installs a different application, that I'm going to remediate or change the actual posture on that device? And this is happening today. This is not fantasy. One of the largest manufacturing companies in the world today in auto, with our product or with AirWatch or with any of those products, if I'm working and I'm having fun and then I go into a manufacturing fab, we turn off camera. We actually increase the security to require PIN codes when you open applications, and we remove certain content from the device. We do that in real time. If a device for most of our customers shows up suddenly in Afghanistan, we entirely wipe the device, we remove email, we say that you have to use multiple forms of authentication to get into that application. Right? Try doing that on your PC today. Right? Go show up in a new location and see if Outlook starts uninstalling. right? See if your content starts to fall away, if it starts doing multiple forms of authentication. That is not possible. It is possible. I think Scott would tell me probably is possible. It's just going to be a very unusual experience, right? To watch things uninstall and add and remove based on context of what the user is doing. And so that gets me to what I think are some of these reasons. So why are we doing this? And again, if you anybody seen the TED Talk of Steve Sinsek? Phenomenal conversation. I recommend everybody watch it. Is about why we do things. Like, what is the point? And the why here has to be fundamentally about enabling people to do their work, to give them the right services, to let them to be collaborative, to be creative, to make decisions in real time. That's why we're doing this, right? We're not doing it to secure and lock down the devices. Those are like how and what, but it's not why, right? If we're not after this agenda to make people more productive, we should stop, right? We should just give them a lockdown XP desktop and move on. But this is what's going to inform people about what they need to do to make the right decisions and to become leaders in their organizations. The thing I will say, though, is that the management is fundamentally different. And I think maybe, how many people are using a EMM or MDM solution today inside of your organization? We have 3. OK, so about half of the room. So I'm going to go through why I believe this is different and then who believes it. Just a little bit, because I know this is BriForum, and we all like to nerd out a little bit. So I'm gonna hopefully you can give me some time. And again, I welcome anybody to ask questions. It's 9 o'clock. Hopefully the coffee is flowing. In the Win32 architecture, right, there is this nice separation of user mode and kernel mode, right? It's beautiful. So the way it should have been. When an application developer comes along, they say, how do I build an application? And Microsoft says, go use Win32 DLL. Actually, now it is the ntdll.dll, right? And say those are the APIs that you should use to go build an app, and just stay up there in user mode. Well, unfortunately, a lot of applications go down into kernel mode, right? Adobe Acrobat Reader goes into kernel mode, right? It does print drivers, right, so that it can create those documents. It does a different graphics driver. I think your Citrix server may do a few of these, right? They may change a few things on the underpinning to make it a bit better. Many applications go down into the kernel mode, and this is what creates what we call the DLL hell scenario, right? That basically you can have conflicting drivers because it's only meant to have one set. So if you uninstall, sometimes it doesn't change those kernel mode drivers. And generally, this is where administrative privileges are required. So if apps require a change to that kernel mode, that's when you have to have an admin right. So different than this, when we look at modern OSs, including Windows 8 RT, Windows 8 Phone, or a truly locked down device, there is separation between those two states. And in fact, an iOS application and even an Android application that's not rooted will only be able to live in user space by definition. It is what I like to call a stateless OS. Right? And this is when my mother-in-law calls and says, Noah, my app has really gone really bad. I don't know what's going on my device, going wrong with it. I say, push the button, and then push back into the app, and she's resolved. Right? Generally. I mean, that is like 95% of the time I say, push the button, get back to a seamless state. Worst case scenario, she has to reboot the device. So the other thing that I love about this is that MDM primitives are built into the core. They are built in from the very beginning. And this is true in iOS. This is what is coming out, again, deeper, richer, better in iOS 7. It's also coming out deeper, richer, better inside of Android. And we'll be doing the same inside of Windows. Scott, do I have this right? I used to always test my slides with him before I don't have the advantage of working with him anymore. Scott and David are both from VMware and amazing architects. By the way, I had a blast at VMware. Anybody thinks that I've ever said anything different? It was a phenomenal company to work for. Second thing about this is the notion of application sandboxing, right? This actually drives developers crazy in some ways because they have to develop an application that can only interact with itself. It means that the file system, everything about that app has to be inside of the app. It means that if I corrupt an application, I just corrupt that application. And it also means that if I want to interact with another application, it's actually very difficult to do so. I have to use the predefined methods for how I call out to other apps. And what I think you'll see ourselves and other solutions in the market do is that we create app management APIs or SDKs or wrappers or things that help to increase the security inside of these individual apps. And we'll talk more about that. But this is becoming a commonplace part of the architecture, especially if you're doing in-house app development. How many people in here are developing applications for your business or have somebody that are developing mobile-specific applications in the business? Awesome, awesome. So about half. I will say that right now, on average, I think our customers, again, in the Fortune 500, probably have around 200 applications that they've developed in-house. Almost all of them are fundamentally iOS. It's transitioning now that we're seeing more, a little bit more Android, but a lot of the early application adoption is on iOS, and it's again starting to go down the path. But so what are the benefits of this type of architecture? And again, the first and foremost, this should be fairly obvious that there are no end-user changes to kernel space, which means that it's a very simple ease of update process. When we look across the millions of devices deployed, we have statistics about the success rate of deployment of applications, and we're running at least towards 5 nines, right? That when we say an app goes out to a user, almost 5-9 times we can guarantee that that happens. What is the percentage people think is success rate in System Center? On Windows with MSI installers, it's not, I don't think it's 5 nines. I hope it is, but it's not. Second thing is that we do believe that the built-in management primitives increase simplicity and really, again, increase the rate of success. So that when you say, make sure the pin code is up to a certain spec, that it happens, right? That when you say, remove an application because it's a vulnerability, it happens. That we can almost guarantee without user intervention that we're going to get the security paradigm that we were expecting. And again, with application sandboxing, we think that this is, again, fundamentally better security and also eliminates application conflicts, again, leading to better management. So how does this translate to actual reduced cost savings? So Gartner recently did their May 2013 report on the cost of PC CLM. And in fact, these are costs for hardware, software, IT operations, and administrative support. And then, boom, end-user costs. And these are in 3 categories. These are application conflicts, downtime, and just basic troubleshooting on the device. Right? And this is, again, why stateless VDI, why a lot of solutions that we look at terminal server architectures start to say that this is the cost, this is the nut that we're going after. That'd be funny to fall right now. That'd be awesome. Anyway, so this is the cost savings that we're trying to drive after. When we look at the cost of managing a mobile device today, we find that number to be about $500. So $4,000 difference, right? That is a big delta. So as an example math, let's say that I only save $1,500, right? That I enable a set of users to be mobile first, and I take 1,000 sales guys and I say, hey, we're going to only give you iPads. That's $1.5 million that I'm going to save the business just if I reduce that cost slightly. And we figure the average cost of a business app is 50 grand. That means we can go develop 30 apps for the business. I don't know if this starts to translate for you, but this is where IT is becoming what I always dreamed it would be. I didn't go into IT to basically do patch, config, virus updates, and wait for Windows to reboot, right? That wasn't the dream of the business. The business dream was to help the business be more agile, to get into adjacencies, to help create new things that end users love. Right? That's why I went into IT, and this is the transformation that, again, I see that is occurring. And so who believes this? Is this Noah Wasmer's belief system? Like, am I selling you on what I believe? No, I'm not. I'm selling you on what Apple believes. They have iOS that says that this is how the new world will be. And guess what? OS X is exactly the same. OS X has the same primitives as iOS, the same exact ones. So now with Mavericks, you can do the same things there that I could do on the Apple device. Guess what? Android and even Chrome have these management primitives, and that they're saying stateless OS with sandboxed applications is the path to go. You'll see blurring between these two OSs. Again, I have no crystal ball better than anybody else, but it makes a lot of sense, right? And now we have Chromecast. I mean, you start to see this transition happening. Well, what about our buddies at Microsoft? You know, I heard there's some debate about do you need EMM if you are, again, if you are managing Windows, so you should make it all Windows architecture. Well, guess what? They put MDM primitives in every single one of their operating systems. I'll go back to that. Windows Pro 8.1 has MDM in it. It means that that device, if you buy it from Best Buy, never has to join a domain. That is a tectonic shift that has shifted, right? I mean, that's my whole career. All I knew was GPOs and results of GPO edits, right? Like, what would happen if I applied these security policies? They have to make this transition, right? Microsoft is telling you you have to go change to modern apps, right? They don't like to tell that story a whole lot, but I'll tell you why I think this is. Maybe other people can chime in. So I was recently, this is about 2 months ago, in New York in one of the world's largest financial services companies with the true CIO. And it's a privilege to be in front of him, and he has 10 of his colleagues, right? And we're talking, and they're talking about their mobile rollout and how it's going really successfully. And literally, disaster struck. Every single one of their web services, their ATMs, their front-end website, their email services, every transaction service they had was down by cyber terrorism. Every single one. It made the news. I was there witnessing it firsthand. And it struck me that we are entering a fundamentally different era, right? That this is an era that we have not even scratched the surface of what you're going to see. The denial of service had come from Russia, and it had come from the US. And they were down. Right? So they all had to leave the meeting and go try to figure out how to remediate these services. And because these services weren't stateless enough, they had all shut down. Right? This is what I believe is the next threat. I mean, you're hearing it, right? I'm not. This is what the government is saying. Cyber terrorism is the next threat. And I am the last fearmonger, hopefully, on the planet. I'm not trying to scare you into this, but I'm trying to say that I believe Microsoft needs you to go this direction. They need you to, right? For them to be a reliable, steady-state platform, we need to get to a hardened OS with really sandboxed applications. Anybody believe it? Nobody. I hope, hopefully, a lot of people agree with what I'm saying. So this notion of what I consider better security, and not just slightly better, but we'll talk more about how I believe this security is a lot better, phenomenally better. Step 2, lower costs. I can drive down lower costs to disposable devices, right? That's what these things are. And end users prefer it. Now, I will say that in most of my career, I only got one. I only got one of these, right? Most of my career, I'm like, this is radically better security, but actually end users don't like it, right? That it's a little bit harder to manage, or it's much more expensive, right? That you pay that trade-off. I believe in these new operating systems with these new applications that we get all three, and that's what I think is the definition of mobile first. Call it what you want, that's what I think it is. And now there's even a new term that is being used called mobile born. Anybody have kids? Anybody have any little kids? I have an 18-month-old, most adorable child. She knows iPhone and iPad like nobody else. She knows how to swipe. I mean, she knows how to swipe. She's trying to hit the PIN code. She will never not know, her grandparents on FaceTime. That's just her DNA now, right? She knows them through proxy. And that's how she will always be computing. And I'm telling you, the people coming in, the Gen Xers coming in right now, are going to, I guess it's millenniums now, millennial, what are they? That this will be their expectation. I remember at VMware, we used to hear this story of one of the big banks brought in 5 guys from MIT, and they gave them a lockdown XP desktop, right? And those guys, I think, lasted 2 weeks, and then they left, right? Because they didn't know how to use those tools. They didn't know anything that they had been taught, how it was usable in that model. And I think that is becoming not just an exception, but the norm. A lot of our customers today show their mobile platforms as a way to entice users of why they're modern, why they're state-of-the-art. So how do you all help become mobile first, and how does desktop virtualization make sense in this? And I'll tell you, first and foremost, what I just talked about is actually not that different from XenApp, right? I mean, I grew up with XenApp. I love XenApp, right? The notion of, do you remember, so first it was, wow, we have this really complex app, and it has crystal reports embedded, has all these drivers, we're going to XenApp that, right? We're going to deploy it down. It wasn't even called XenApp then. It was called, God, how many names it went through? What's that? iframe, metaframe. And do you remember, as it evolved, it started to be like, do you want to allow local printers? Do you want to allow direct file access? Do you want to allow USB access, right? It says, hey, we had a sandbox app that we were going to deploy, but now we need to poke some holes through it, right? And so the first and foremost, the model that you thought about is, what applications should I start to transition to this model of stateless delivery to these endpoints? And now this model is actually following through. In the mobile space, in the conversations that we have every day with customers, is first and foremost in a MDM type model on the device side, we know, I was going to swear there, I'm going to grow up at some point. We know a ton about the devices. We know a ton. We know what their OS is. We know what applications are installed. We know which network they're on. We know if it's a home or a roaming carrier. Why does that matter? Why does it matter that I know if it's a roaming carrier? Because I can save a ton of money for my customer, right? If you're not on a home carrier, limit bandwidth or constrain bandwidth or control that amount of data that goes to the device. I know if it's jailbroken. I know what level of encryption is installed. I know all of that, right? And I know all of that many, many, many times a day, right? This is every process that you'll see us doing. Basically, when an application fires up, we do a complete inventory of the device, send it back to the server, and then basically say, is it still compliant? It is a real-time set of services. But now we also know a ton about the applications, right? We know, can we control open width? Can we control printing? Can we control copy-paste, right? These are things that, again, should sound familiar to VDI and Citrix administrators. Which services do I want to turn on that make that application be delivered? But I also know a lot about data and content. I know where it came from. I know, again, should I allow them to copy-paste? I know what applications I should allow them to go into. It's a very powerful technology. And the result of this is that all of those criteria result in a resulting action. It's a very simple formula. I'm giving you, again, the crown jewels of what we do every single day is have a very complex set of algorithms that say, all of these things based on these properties, this is what I want to allow you to do. And if something goes wrong, we want you to do something different, right? And so our entire product is built on this notion. It's built on this model. And this is, again, what I call a policy engine. But the fundamental difference, again, is it's real time. So if I see that the end user on a corporate device installed Dropbox, I can automatically remove services from that device, just instantaneously, and give them a notice that says, hey, until you re-add that application or remove that application, you no longer get any key services. And I think that's what's important here is that the notion in mobility is that this is a carrot and stick model. It is not the, again, command and control model. And what I mean by this is that by default, you will get a set of services, and if you want email, if you want your content, if you want secure browsing, you're going to have to comply. You're going to have a PIN code on the device, or you're going to have PIN codes on those applications. You're going to have to do certain things in order to get the services that you want. But what's different about this than traditional desktop virtualization is that there is a whole set of services that are native to the deck, right? We've got email, we have the different file services, we have browsing that all contain what I consider sensitive data. And secondly, they also need access, right? And so a lot of companies think about mobility and they say, okay, we're going to manage the device and we're going to use our traditional Wi-Fi VPN infrastructure. And unfortunately, that's not enough either, right? Because you're going to have 3x the number of devices that you used to have on PC, and I promise you, you will. It will happen, right? That you're not. Shouldn't come to a surprise. These devices will enter into the business, and so how does this network that basically allows access to information to come through those different apps? How do you control that gateway? And this is where you really have to rethink network access control, right? I know Citrix has NetScaler that does some of this. Mobile Iron has a product called Sentry. These are key components. There's Cisco ICE, right, that a lot of companies have done integration with, including Mobile Iron, that basically say, how do we inform the network about the exact details of the posture of the device to say what they can get access to? And by the way, if something gets corrupted, for example, if they jailbreak the device, how do we instantly cut that line? People used to say active sync was sufficient, right? I love that phrase. I love going into that meeting. That's one of my favorites. Like, active sync will solve everything. You guys don't do anything different. I say, great. Let me take your phone. Let me root it. Let me jailbreak it. Let's see how long it takes before that mail stops flowing. Let's wait and see what happens, right? That usually is a help desk call. Somebody that, we've detected. There's nothing in the Exchange Active Sync world, right? There's nothing that says stop mail flowing to that device. So this is what becomes important, is that we have to think about not just the state of the data on the devices, but also how we control that network flow. And increasingly, what I think is important is that there are going to be extremely sensitive applications that have incredibly sensitive data that we're going to have to do even special things with. And this is where you get into deeper application management, network management, certificates, et cetera. And we'll dive into that at a very high level today. Any questions? Maybe I'll just pause for a moment. Yes, Scott?
I'm thinking back to a comment you made earlier when you were meeting with the CIO of banks and the denial of service attack.
Mm-hmm.
While it's inarguable that the modern operating systems are more secure for viruses and things onto the device, it seems to me that the biggest threat in this modern world is not the endpoint device, it's the data flows through a public internet. I mean, the boundary in the corporation is extremely porous now because using cloud services and data. People are moving data to different services. How do you really protect that data?
Love that question. It's a great question. So how many people flew into O'Hare and saw free internet, right? Did you see like, hey, there's a free, and then there's one that always says like super fast, awesome Wi-Fi for free. And you click on it and it says, great, like you're entering an untrusted network, right? And it says, do you want to do not do this or continue? Right? Everybody hits continue, right? You're like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Like a free, super fast, awesome Wi-Fi. The problem is that if you go wire packets sniff that stuff, you're sending I almost swore again, a ton of information. You're sending a ton of information. In fact, header information. You can even, in some mail services, you're sending credentials, right? You're saying, hey, I'm trying to get in. And it's because you don't have things like certificates are not dominant today in terms of how people think about this. And in fact, a lot of the products out there, ourselves included, say that certificates have to be just dominating this type of architecture, right? So that you're not just pushing, like every time that you say get access to mail is validating that certificate in the back end. That's one form, right? There's other forms of actually testing the device and its posture that come into play here. The multiple forms of authentication become relevant. We are seeing most of our customers saying that if they're going to tunnel resources in a mobile way, certificates are actually a fairly easy way to implement. And actually, these are really fast rotated certificates that help to manage specific app access to specific devices, right? So that's just one form of answer that I do think you have to have what I consider precise tunnels. So if I think everybody here knows that if today on a mobile device you open up a Cisco VPN onto the device, just to open it up, every application on the device is exposed to every service inside of the data center, right? You may have done some rules and some logic to try to prevent some of that, but that largely is the model, right? And that is unacceptable. That is just blanket, like that should not be a standard. And instead, there's things like per app VPN that are coming from iOS 7. There's app tunneling from Mobile Iron. I think AirWatch has a different technology. All of those things become important to say, this app is going to this specific resource and there's double checks along the way, right? And things like Cisco Identity Services Engine, they have to have real-time information about the device to make that critical decision, right? And that's where we think this becomes just paramount. I'll say that there's an example of how this plays in the Windows world. So how many people have heard of Blue Cat? Blue Cat Networks? Great. David, Blue Cat is a DHCP provider, right? And of all things to be reinvented, you would think DHCP, not necessarily the thing that needs to get reinvented. But what they've done is they've done integration with different MDM providers to say, when I get in, the first thing we're going to do, even with a Windows device, is assess the posture of the Windows device and what subnet they get. I get an IP address based on my posture. So, right, the MDM policy engine is talking to that DHCP provider, DHCP, sorry. And if let's say that they don't have the latest Adobe Acrobat update, that it will send them off to a different IP address that will then allow them only to download that update, right? It'll get all the updates and patches, then it will reassess the posture, and based on that being true, lets them into the corporate network, right? This just has to be standard ways of thinking about network access, application control, right? This is the dynamic change that we're seeing in the market. So let's talk a little bit about the applications and what this transformation. This COO that I talked to, he asked me this question that it was the first time in my career I've heard it. It's pretty exciting. I don't necessarily believe it, but he said, what if we take our 120,000 employees and we move them only to OS 10 and iOS? Just that's it. Those are the only platforms that we use inside the entire bank. And I said, Awesome. It's going to take you a decade. How many Windows apps do you have? And I think he said 8,400 Windows applications, right? And then I asked him, what is your transformation process? Like, how are you thinking about re-architecting your applications? And he said, well, first and foremost, like a lot of banks, how many developers, hands-on coders out of 120,000 people does this bank have? 10,000 developers. 10,000 developers, 14,000 QA. Like I mean, banks are software firms as far as that's almost as large as what? It's probably top 50 software companies in the world if you look at it that way. And he said, actually the transition to mobile, to building mobile applications is not my problem at all. I have plenty of developers. I outsource like crazy. I can get the applications developed. What I'm thinking about is transforming my backend to look more like Amazon. Right, so that it's a service-oriented architecture of APIs across all of these different back-end services. I want some level of middleware that I then determine how to make all of these apps available across these different devices. And depending on the use case, some I'll build native mobile, some I'll build web. Occasionally I will build Windows. And that was out of his mouth. And so this transformation is a conversation I don't know how many people are having inside of their companies, but is an important one, especially, again, as many of you are VDI administrators and Citrix desktop administrators, that it is a question about what are we doing to transform those apps. I know remoting is a great solution for some things, but really building them into native mobile is where you're going to find the business processes start to excel. And so where do you start? And first and foremost, again, I don't want to be cliche on these things, but first there's very clear story of when there's a clear business goal at hand, right? And I'll give you the example again of the retailer that wants to do point of sale, right? It's a very important use case that they say, cheap device, we can enable it. UPS truck drivers, right, that they want to have real-time information and they don't want to buy the $5,000 Motorola, whatever it was, ruggedized device. They just want an Android tablet. So that's the first, is that there's a very clear business goal. I'll give you another example is nurses in the hallway, right? So Epic, Cerner, McKesson, they for the longest time were Zen-apping that app to the iPad, right? Anybody work in healthcare here? So Zen-app's pretty big, I would assume, in your farm. And those companies, Epic, Cerner, McKesson, said that we are going to create specialized apps for nurses roaming in the hallways and triaging, right? That they will have these very fast, very quick applications for the specific, what I call microtasks, right? And that's what a lot of times mobile applications are, is a very specific, defined function that I want to get done, and I want to get it done really quickly. And that's where we, again, find a ton of success and why you start to see a lot of applications being developed. You have to really think about the security that's required. In some ways, these, again, are much more secure, and we'll talk about how we architect them. And then we also have to know who's developing the solution. Are they being outsourced, or is this being developed in-house? Because I'll tell you, there's two distinct conversations in the mobile space. One is about, hey, we developed it in-house, and we want to have best practices. If I have 10,000 developers, I'm going to have a conversation about what is our framework for authentication? What's our framework for configuration? What is our framework for tunneling, right? So that everybody's on the same page developing the same way. If I have, marketing company A and some outsourced company B developing apps, I'm not going to be able to get them to do the right level of security into the app. And that's where things like wrapping may come into play. So what platforms are required for support? Do you require across platforms, or are you requiring mostly iOS? And again, it's not that I am necessarily as big an Apple fanboy as you may think, but it really is dominant in at least in the US business system. We're finding today it's about 90% iOS for these different devices. In EMEA, we're seeing almost 50% Android, so that is a much different market. In APJ, it's almost 90% Android. Right? So it depends on your company and where you're located. So the other thing I would say is start small and have success, right? And we see this time and time again, is that when companies build their first app, end users love it. They just absolutely love it. They start saying, hey, this is just what's going on inside the company, or this is where I get my HR material, or this is how I look up the campus directory, or how I reserve a meeting room. Right? When you do those small apps, it starts to get a ton of value out to your end users, and they start wanting to do more. The other thing that I'll say about this is Noah's theory of change. So, and there's probably about 20 startups in here, so I'm going to give you some valuable information. You can judge that for yourself. There's Visual Studio today, and there's Microsoft Office, right? When you think about developing content, there's almost two extremes, right? I'm either a hardcore developer or I am a office productivity worker, right? I have iWork and I have Xcode. My feeling is that what we're going to see is something right in the middle, right? Something that says, in the future, you're not going to develop PowerPoint. You're not going to develop a Word doc. You're going to develop an app, right? And it is going to be a tool that helps you make an app. That is what I think is a huge opportunity. If Microsoft or Apple are in the room, go for it, go nuts. We see this with something called iBooks Author. Anybody played with that or tinkered with it at all? It is a way of building multimedia-rich applications on top of iOS, and it's free to download, right? You can build them, and you can deploy iBooks out to your enterprise. Take that a few steps further, and you'll start to say, an end user comes in and wants to build a state-of-the-art application, hook into some back-end database. It looks like Access for the future, right? And then mobile applications will be exploding in your business. That is probably only a year or two away, in my estimation. People, does that sound right? And so that's where, again, applications that you traditionally had thought about as, some software developer coder are now going to be your business teams, right? Your sales team, making brochure apps, right? Trying to get that content out to the market. So the next step is, so what are the challenges? And first and foremost, I think authorization and authentication, configuration, and let me talk about those just a couple quick minutes. How many people do federated web single sign-on today? Okay. Very few, right? Maybe I would say maybe what, 25% of the crowd. Federated sign-on, meaning that you only have one credential and it passes a token. There's actually not passwords for other apps. This is what we think is going to be required if this is going to be state-of-the-art in the future, especially in the context of having some applications that are personally owned and some applications that are corporate owned. Apple introduced enterprise single sign-on in their latest iOS 7, and while I can't disclose the details, they're thinking this way, right? Apple is thinking this way. Like they talk about it at WWDC. It's a proud moment for all of nerdlets, that say, hey, they care about me too. The configuration is really important, and this is something that I think Apple introduced what's called NS default, but there's a lot of other important areas here. This means that when you fire up an application, that today end users have to go enter in username, password, server configuration, port number, right? Stuff that end users shouldn't have to be doing. And there's a way that when you pop up that it should actually pull that data in from a centralized service. And that's things that we do is it helps make that process very, very simple. And in fact, here's a good difference. Scott's point about certificates, right? That certificates should be configuration data, right? That you basically pull that in, say here's that user, that access that they need, and that certificate is going to help them get back-end resource. So from an enterprise policy perspective, today, and I will say that Android and iOS both don't care about things like copy-paste, right? They say that should always be present, right? But do you as a company say that, hey, if they're in corporate mail or if they're in a corporate application, do I want to prevent that control? Then you need to start looking at other application services and frameworks that help you turn on and turn off those different capabilities, right? This just depends on your business. And so there's really a couple different ways of doing this. There's application SDKs. Again, Apple is trying to push everybody to say use only their SDK. Google hasn't quite shown up to the party yet on the enterprise side. I suspect that they will. Application wrapping, I think that we tend to see it as a solution that's incredibly helpful in the native in-house developed applications. And we think it is actually nice because it gives you most of these controls, if not all of these controls, without any change to the app. Right? So if you remember, if I said, hey, some company out in somewhere else developed the app and you bring it in-house, you can just wrap it and basically then have those policies on that app. So you didn't require the developer to make those changes. Apple hates wrapping. I think it goes without saying. Anybody know any reasons why they hate it? Why we think they hate it? Yeah? That's one. It could hinder the user experience. It also kind of tampers with DRM a little bit. You know, it kind of basically says, hey, your app looks a little different than we expected, and it can get through processes that they don't love. So, you know, again, internal in-house deployment of wrapping is pretty critical. In terms of iOS 7, they have set up a whole set of policies around application management. So they have, by default, they have enterprise SSO, they have configuration, probably not to the degree that most folks need. And then on the other side, Samsung has come out with Knox. I don't think they're showing it here, are they at all? Anybody familiar with Knox? Anybody heard of it? Wow, cool. So Samsung, just like Apple, has basically said, hey, if you want any of these really awesome, cool capabilities, you're going to need a mobile management stack. You're going to need an EMM product, right? So every time I see a Samsung billboard and you see SAFE on it, right? Samsung SAFE, Secure Application Framework for the Enterprise, something like that. That's an advertisement saying you need another product that helps to manage this. And what Knox is basically on deck a secure container space that's FIPS compliant, has a FIPS compliant VPN, and it basically says only those applications can work within themselves. So it's a very mainstream way of trying to get an isolation between corporate and personal applications. Apple, I don't think, believes in that same vision. I think they say that everything merges seamlessly on the deck. But Knox is something that we expect to see heavily in the DoD and in the federal space, so there'll be more there. There's also, anybody using Accelerator or Worklight? These are basically application frameworks that allow you to take your existing web services and translate them into, I would say, quasi-native applications. They're almost like jQuery Mobile or other solutions that help to give you a rich user experience, but to do it in a secure way. And those are actually really interesting products that work really well with different SDKs. So this is what we see inside of your business. There's what's shaping feels to me to be what we call kind of a mobile center of excellence. And a lot of times it's started by the VDI Citrix administrators, right? Because you guys have been doing this. You've been talking about getting apps remoted for a long time. And inside of that center of excellence starts to be the complete understanding of how you're going to transition the organization over the next 10 years. All right, so I'm almost done, and then we'll turn it over to content or to questions. But on content, one of the things that we want to see is that there's a clean separation between content consumption and content creation. Right? We're not expecting people on their mobile devices to create their dissertation unless they're in college. And in college, they are. They are using iPads and their phones as their primary authoring technologies. I think for a lot of us, that we still rely on a full desktop and keyboard. But also this notion is we can't just simply mount the 25 petabytes of storage onto these mobile devices. What we need to do is curate it and offer it in a way that's organized and helps end users get to the right content in the right ways, and also keeping it up to date. So if there's something like an HR policy, how are we pushing it out in real time so that you know that you have the most current document? And file security, again, is incredibly important about how you both get that file to the device and then which other applications that it can control. And keep in mind that it's not simply about document management, but also about web content management. Safari is not a managed browser, nor is Chrome on these different decks. So usually you require a third-party browser that helps to manage the VPN or manage tunneling or manage what we consider even Kerberos delegation, so Kerberos constrained delegation, so that we can do single sign-on. So last couple slides. We do think that this is a notion of apps plus data plus advanced management. That really is getting us down this path of how we enable users with the right level of access, the right transformation in terms of applications and content, and how you start to transform the business to a mobile-first paradigm. And again, this is what we think is going to be the next decade, and the proof point really is in customer adoption. MobileIron has over 5,000 customers already, and it's just growing like crazy. I think AirWatch is there, or whatever they state they are. They're really, really good and competitive out there in the market. Citrix is, again, coming on strong. So they're all telling you that this is a future stated direction. VMware's been doing some amazing work out there. But in terms of what I think the first steps are, is first and foremost is to really start. Right? We hear companies start to say, well, we're going to wait and see, and we're going to maybe put our toe in the water. I'm telling you, you are going to see huge value right out of the gates by getting a system in place that helps your users, when they do one login, get their Wi-Fi automatically set up, get their email automatically set up, if there's a VPN in place, so it gets all configured we call this really end-user enablement. All the services they have automatically get configured, and then the next steps are, how do we think about apps and how do we think about content? I like this mobile center of excellence notion. Find the people that are involved. I guarantee you, inside of your businesses, there are people developing apps today, right? And go find them, figure out how you want to have an app store across your business, take ownership of it. This is, again, if you're not seeing it today, I promise you, you will. This is an exciting market to be part of. It's fast, it's fun. There's a lot of devices that are really great to be playing with. And lastly, is start to encourage application best practices. If it's not out of control, it will shortly be. We have heard, I can't tell you the number of times we hear that the mobile apps are already out of control in terms of management. There's something to get in front of right away and start doing it in a controlled way. So I think I have just 5-10 minutes, and I'd love to open it up for questions. Yep, David.
Yeah, so one of the things I loved at the end, and I was hoping you could maybe elaborate even more. I've been talking for a few months about that I have a belief that all knowledge work is created outside of enterprise controls in the mobile-first world. You go to a meeting, before you leave that whiteboard, what do? You take a picture of it. Boom, that content is outside enterprise controls. Everyone here probably is using Evernote. Immediately, content is always being created outside of enterprise controls, and that leads us to the challenge that I've been calling data ingestion. I need to bring this information that is starting outside the walls of the enterprise back in. So I think I've got a much better handle now from the presentation on all the different ways to try and help secure the data inside the enterprise. How are we going to help get content to protect in the first place?
Let me, when you think about all the different data sources, there's two ways that I think businesses are going to look at this. One is to say, is it worthwhile for me to actually pay for the device, right? And this is a little controversial, but if you look at the low-end devices now, they're about $500. And $500 for a security mechanism is actually incredibly low cost, right, when I think about it. There's as an example, Apple, and I keep using that frame, Apple has, in iOS 7, introduced streamlined device enrollment. Anybody ever heard about that and I can't say a ton about it, but the idea is that, and I think I'll say what they say, the idea is that you can order a pallet of devices, 10,000 of them, get them delivered at your door, right? And when you open that up, like today, you have to go unbox it, tether it with USB cord, right, and put configurator on it and try to say every app that goes on there this is a managed device. That is non-starter, right? The federal government alone is ordering 1 million of these devices. That's a lot of opening and tethering. It's fun for like 2 devices, not fun for 1 million. So the streamlined device enrollment now allows you to ship the device directly to the user, and when they first log in, they put in it'll say set up Wi-Fi. The next question, and again I'll save how it's done, but the next question is what's your enterprise credentials on an unboxed iPad? That's freaking awesome. That is awesome. It literally, you log in, and all of a sudden, behind the scenes, your apps, your data, your content get installed on that device. Done. Out of the box. It's done. Like, that is phenomenal. And what that means to me is that every app that you push out, the enterprise app store of the Evernotes, of the bookstores, whatever apps you want, are actually managed applications, right? That device is considered a managed device, but there's some apps that they can install that are outside of that periphery. Right, so that for example, you can now have the content that you care about, leave Facebook alone. And so that is where I start to feel that potentially Apple is pushing a direction to say, have it be a corporate purchase device, right? Because you get that initial starting phrase that will protect all of the data on the endpoint. In a BYOD model, I think there is the challenge. I mean, the way that Apple does it is now they say managed applications, so that I would do Evernote as a managed app, right? That I would pull them in. The problem with it is if I had personally owned Evernote and then I convert to managed, it's different, right? It's like you have to uninstall and reinstall the managed app. It's not elegant. It's a very, very difficult conversation. I think that will come into, again, if you think about going from the monkey to the walking guy, it's where app developers will have to start thinking about individual end-user sandboxes, and that's something that I think is not that far down the path, right? I think you start to see that with things like NS default and opportunities for developers to start creating the separation. Or you could use things like App Connect and other technologies that help to secure individual apps. But it is a marching process, a lot of different ways to approach it.
I wonder if you could comment a little bit on one of the things about the consumer world is the universe is moving so quickly. There's new apps all the time. There's better ways of working. One of the benefits is choice. It seems to me a lot of the time, when in an ideal world, what you'd like to have happen is you'd like to be protecting actually the data, because that's really what the corporate tools are, not the apps. But you want to be able to manipulate it with whatever the latest and greatest is. Do you see any movement towards that direction, or do you think the Evernotes of the world and other apps are going to have to be able to handle both personal and work data separately?
Yeah, I think it's somewhat similar to David's question about how do we have some like level of core centralized data that is then, as you mentioned, manipulated. And there's two different ways. One is to either really have a corporate managed device, right, where behind the scenes every app is pushed through the enterprise as a managed app, and then the enterprise actually owns that data, right? The enterprise can control that data, and basically in the iOS 7 world, every single app in the App Store can be managed, 100%, right? There's no gap, right? And that's what I think is nice, and that's why I call it this $500 tax for security. If you want to say that the device is brought in from the end user, then you have to get into these notions of either that they are a managed app, right? And then you can have secure ways of communicating to those apps. And there's, again, Mobile Iron has technologies to do that with App Connect. I think AirWatch and Citrix have some other technologies. So it really is creating a centralized place, for example, where documents reside, and then the other apps that can securely communicate with it. So you start small, start with all the apps, and you try to build an ecosystem around it. I tend to like the idea that you want to have almost every app in the App Store be usable in that model, and that's where I think you're more of a managed device. Managed device with a end user is kind of like pivoting to, do you have there was this notion of a totally unmanaged device, and then this small little space where end users went that was managed. Apple kind of flipped that around and say the whole device is managed, and you can have this little space where you have your personal stuff, right? And that I think is probably an interesting transition point. Yeah, back there.
Actually, on that, so iOS 7 and Knox are representing advancements in native containerization, and on the other side you have the container technology that's good, technology, Enterprise, and then VMware just yesterday announced they were dropping containers on iOS. iOS 7 represents the advancement. What are your thoughts on the role of third-party containers, evolution of native containers?
Yeah, I think on iOS, I think I agree with VMware's statements. I am not sure I fully understood all that was announced. I just haven't read up on it, but I think iOS is saying that you're kind of getting the container behind the scenes by having managed apps, right? And the UI of it is all the same deck, right? There's no like I jumped over here and now I'm in personal. I jumped over here, I'm in corporate, right? So they said that. So I think that is the right path for iOS 100%. Android is a tricky animal, right? It is the Wild West. There's a lot of fragmentation, a lot of challenges. So the approaches of Good and Enterprise, Mobile Iron has similar, where we have like this space where you're trying to say only these apps are secured. I think VMware's Workspace kind of does the same. I think that those are pragmatic approaches for where we are right now. I do sense that that will evolve as well. A lot of people say Google doesn't care about the enterprise, right? They say they really care about search widgets. I think there is one area that they should care about if they don't today, and why they'll change as well, is, well, one, they hired Steve Sinclair from Apple to go work at Motorola, and he was the founder of iOS. He was the guy that designed it, so I think he believes it. Two, enterprise developers basically look at iOS as the place to go, right? Like if you're an enterprise developer, in my opinion, you say, iOS 7 has everything I need, all the security, all the control, I'm going to start there. And I do think Google should care, because now the developer, if you can't really get the mind share of the developer, you're in a bad place. So I do think Google will start to say, okay, there's some level of device, user spaces. They introduced, what was it in the Nexus 7? The user. Yeah, and it was kind of more like a parental control type technology, but that's kind of a starting point, I think, for them to say, get something richer in there around user spaces. But right now, that's 10 minutes, right? Perfect. I counted correctly. But I do think right now, like the way I approach Android and how we do it, I think, as well as some of our competition, is to say, first, let's get the turnkey services: email, calendar, contacts, set of file services, a secure browser, and a file editor. Deliver that as a first set of services on this heterogeneous devices, and that over time we need to figure out how the ecosystem comes along. I really, and again, I'll speak maybe overly candidly on this. I think trying to wrap the half million applications out there is not going to happen. So there has to be something unique and differentiated to really take advantage of the ecosystem, like iOS 7 did. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm curious if you could comment on that evolving to traditional management as well. You mentioned Windows 8.1 and macOS 10. What's your outlook
on Windows?
Yeah, or Windows and even macOS.
Yeah, so Windows actually, and I'll look to Jack to make sure I'm correct on this. Windows actually allows multiple MDM profiles, which I think is awesome. That's like a really, really cool breakthrough, because then you can say an MDM profile is actually an app, right? You could say, hey, I work for this charity organization. Here's my MDM profile associated to just that application, right? And so I think that they have a model that will say you can almost do a per app MDM scenario, which is kind of cool. On Microsoft Pro, I think they're still pretty early, and the only app deployment is really around modern apps, right? Which is, you can imagine why, right? They're the ones that are sandboxed and you can add and remove. I think Microsoft has a whole lot of challenges on their hands about how they help move the developer ecosystem along. That will be really, that user mode, kernel mode space is where that challenge comes in, is they don't have that clean cut. But I have hope that they will really take this on, and actually they've been an amazing partner to us. So I can't say enough about Microsoft. Other question? I think I have time for like one more. Yeah.
Great conversation. Really like some of your ideas and what we're talking about here. One of the things I talked about is mobile information management. Scott hit it a little bit earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I look at that policy and security actually has to follow the data.
Yep.
And I think iOS 7 and Apple are on their way to enabling that by removing some of those pieces from the app wrappers, SDK, as you said.
Right.
Where do you see that progressing, and especially with different vendors?
So the question was mobile information management, and how do we see that progressing across different vendors? So one I think one interesting point is what's the role of identity in all of this, right? And how does identity get tied? And I think VMware, Ping, Okta, there's a set of companies that are really thinking about how do we stitch identity into not just to the applications and to the device, but how are we now starting to think about that from a content perspective? You have Watchdocs right out this door that I would say is one of the better companies to literally say, and I know there's a ton of them, Excellion and Group Logic, to say that every piece of content is bound to my identity, and I manage that leakage workflow. I love those solutions, and I think they will have a long-standing future. I don't think for the 90% of businesses, I don't think that's the right approach, right? I think that is a highly regulated, controlled data model perspective. I think the iOS 7 model of managed apps is the lighter, gentler, brings the ecosystem along approach. So again, I think Apple has just made a statement in path in the market to say, OS 10, iOS have this notion, and it works, right? And works really, really well. And I think you'll see a lot of the other companies racing to follow, right? Racing to follow that. And you saw that with Samsung Knox, right? That they said, we're going to create even more secure, right? And that we're going to create this secure place. I am thrilled that there's that competition in the market, because it's just better for all of us, right? It's better for us to say that the information, the applications, the identity, how it carries through, are at least going to be available as primitives, and it's up to vendors like the Mobile Irons, the AirWatches, the VMwares, and Citrixes to start to say, this is the next generation, right? System Center command and control, in my opinion, is not the future. I think Microsoft is dictating that. You know, if you look at the Semantic, BMC, Altiris, Landesk, Tivoli, BigFix, that's $20 to $30 billion of market spend a year. And in my opinion, and no offense to any of those folks, that's going to be transitioning away over the next 5 into these new spaces. They themselves will probably acquire or build technologies, but this is this notion of real-time posture tied to identity, tied to all of the different services you get. That is state of the art, right? And I love seeing it. All right, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate the time. I'm Noah at Mobile Iron or Noah at EchoFox. If you guys know folks, we're also hiring like gonzo, so we're looking for product managers, engineers. That's my one pitch is that you know, we're in Mountain View, California, where most of our folks are. But come check out our booth, and thanks so much for the time today. Cheers.